Seriously, Naomi? He doesn't need junk from your garage? Open it, Marcus.
The laughter started before my son even opened the box. It was Marcus's 42nd birthday and 20 people were gathered around a polished table at one of Richmond's finest steakhouses. His wife Camille stared at the scratched walnut box I had placed beside his expensive gifts and smirked. "Seriously, Naomi," she said, "he's 42. He doesn't need another piece of junk from your garage." A few guests laughed. Then Marcus laughed too. That hurt more than anything Camille could have said. I looked at my son and quietly said, "Open it, Marcus." He lifted the lid. Inside was an old brass key, a photograph of him with his father, and a sealed envelope in Samuel's unmistakable handwriting. Marcus stopped laughing. His face went pale, and Camille's smile slowly disappeared. Before I tell you what Samuel had left inside that box, if you've ever watched someone judge a gift or a person by appearances, please like this video and subscribe. And tell me in the comments, would you have stayed silent at that table, or would you have answered Camille right then? 6 weeks before Marcus opened that walnut box at his birthday dinner, I still believed the distance between us was something time could fix. I told myself he was busy. That was the excuse mothers like me become very good at making for their grown children. Marcus had a company to run. He had employees depending on him, clients calling at all hours, contracts to negotiate, and a wife whose real estate business seemed to require a different charity dinner, networking reception, or private event every week. So when 3 days passed without hearing from him, I told myself he was busy. When 3 days became 2 weeks, I told myself the same thing. I was 68 years old, and I had lived in the same brick house on the west side of Richmond for 34 years. Samuel and I bought it when Marcus was 7. Back then, the upstairs bathroom leaked whenever it rained, the kitchen cabinets were painted an awful shade of yellow, and the backyard was mostly weeds. Samuel loved it immediately. "Good bones," he said. That was Samuel's answer to almost everything. A damaged house had good bones. A struggling business had good bones. Even a person who had made a terrible mistake could have good bones. Samuel believed the foundation mattered more than whatever people could see from the street. He had been gone 4 years by then. Some mornings I could say those words without feeling anything break inside me. Other mornings I would walk into the kitchen, see the empty chair where he used to drink his coffee, and grief would return as if someone had opened a door I thought I had locked. I never turned our home into a shrine, but I didn't erase him either. His old work jacket still hung on a hook inside the garage. His carpenter's level rested above the workbench. A coffee can filled with bent nails sat exactly where he had left it because Samuel insisted bent nails were useful if you had enough patience, and behind the garage was his little workshop. That room held the story of our family better than any photograph album could. Samuel had started as a carpenter, not a businessman, not a developer, a carpenter. He worked with his hands until his knuckles thickened and tiny scars crossed his fingers like pale lines on a road map. When Marcus was a boy, he followed Samuel everywhere. At 8, Marcus could identify half the tools on the wall. At 12, he could use most of them. By 16, he was spending his summers on job sites carrying lumber and sweeping floors, while his friends complained that their parents made them mow the lawn. Samuel never gave him special treatment, especially because he was his son. If everybody else starts at 7, Samuel would say, "You don't arrive at 7:15 because your last name is Brooks." Marcus used to roll his eyes, but he showed up at 6:50. That was the Marcus I remembered. After college, he returned to Richmond and joined the business full-time. Samuel was proud, although he rarely said it directly. He would come home and tell me things instead. The kid handled the Reynolds problem today, or Marcus caught an estimate I missed. That was Samuel's version of shouting from the rooftops. By the time Samuel became ill, the little renovation business had grown into a respected regional company. After his death, Marcus took over day-to-day operations. At first I worried the responsibility would crush him. Instead, he seemed to thrive. Brooks and Carter renovations expanded rapidly. Marcus and Anthony Carter moved into larger commercial projects. They renovated historic properties, upscale homes, restaurants, and eventually small residential developments. Within 3 years, the company had nearly doubled its annual revenue. I was proud of him. I still am proud of parts of him. That's what makes family disappointment so complicated. You don't stop loving the person just because you stop recognizing some of their choices. Camille entered Marcus's life 2 years before Samuel died. She was beautiful, polished, ambitious, and exceptionally good at selling real estate. In the beginning, I liked her confidence. She could walk into a room full of strangers and leave knowing everyone's name, occupation, and probably what neighborhood they wanted to move into. Samuel once joked that Camille could sell a staircase to a man who lived in a one-story house. But after Samuel died and Marcus became more successful, something changed. Or maybe I simply began noticing what had always been there. Camille cared deeply about appearances. The right car, the right restaurant, the right neighborhood, the right people sitting at your table. She convinced Marcus to sell the modest house he'd owned before their marriage and buy a sprawling new place in one of Richmond's wealthier suburbs. There was nothing wrong with that. What bothered me was the way she began talking about everything that came before it. One Thanksgiving, she stood in my living room, looking at the old oak dining table Samuel had refinished himself. "You know, Naomi," she said, running a finger over its edge, "this could actually be worth something if you had it professionally restored." I almost laughed. Samuel had professionally restored it, but I simply said I like it the way it is. She gave me that sympathetic little smile people use when they think age has made you stubborn. You have to let yourself move forward eventually. Move forward. Camille used those words often. Apparently, moving forward meant replacing anything that reminded you of where you had been. Marcus never spoke to me that way. But increasingly, he didn't stop her either. That hurt differently. He started visiting less. Sunday breakfasts became monthly lunches. Monthly lunches became, "Mom, can we reschedule?" Phone calls that once lasted 40 minutes became 4. I learned about company milestones through local business articles before I heard about them from my own son. Still, whenever Marcus called, I heard flashes of the boy who used to sit on my kitchen counter stealing pieces of fried chicken while I cooked. That was enough to keep me hoping. Then one Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang. It was Camille. "Naomi, how are you?" Her voice was unusually cheerful. "I'm fine, good. Listen, Marcus's birthday is coming up." "I know," she laughed lightly. "Of course you do. We're doing something a little bigger this year." She told me she'd reserved a private dining area at an upscale steakhouse downtown. About 20 guests, some friends, several important clients. Anthony Carter would be there. A few people connected to a new development Marcus was pursuing would also attend. Then Camille paused. "This isn't really going to be one of our usual family dinners." I knew what she meant before she explained it. "We're trying to make it special," she continued. "A little more sophisticated. Marcus has reached an important point in his career. I understand. Dressy, but not too formal." I looked down at the cardigan I was wearing and almost smiled. "I'm familiar with restaurants, Camille." There was a short silence. I didn't mean it like that. Of course she had. But I wasn't going to fight with my daughter-in-law over a dress code. "I'll be there." "Wonderful." Then just before ending the call, she said something that stayed with me. "And Naomi, please don't feel like you have to bring anything sentimental. Marcus can be hard to shop for now. Honestly, he already has everything, everything." After we hung up, I sat quietly at my kitchen table. Through the window, I could see the garage. Beyond it stood Samuel's workshop. For reasons I couldn't explain, I got up and walked outside. The workshop smelled faintly of sawdust even after 4 years. Late afternoon sunlight crossed the workbench. I ran my fingers along Samuel's old carpenter's level, then noticed something on the shelf beneath it. A small walnut box. Dust covered the lid. There were scratches along the corners and one dark stain near the brass latch. I hadn't opened it in years. I lifted it carefully, and for just a moment I could see 12-year-old Marcus standing beside his father again, smiling proudly, while Samuel guided his hands over a piece of walnut. I remembered what Samuel had said that day. Not to me, to our son, a sentence Marcus had probably forgotten, but I hadn't. And standing alone in that workshop, holding the old wooden box Camille would later laugh at, I had no idea that before Marcus's birthday arrived, I would finally discover exactly what Samuel had meant. 3 days after Camille called about the birthday dinner, Marcus showed up at my house without warning. I was in the kitchen slicing apples when I heard his truck pull into the driveway. For a second, I felt that ridiculous little rush of happiness mothers never quite outgrow. Marcus used to walk through the back door without knocking. That afternoon he rang the bell. "Since when do you need permission to come into your own mother's house?" I asked when I opened the door. He smiled and kissed my cheek. "Since my mother started locking the door, Richmond isn't what it was 30 years ago. Neither are you." I raised an eyebrow. He laughed. For a few minutes it felt easy again. He drank coffee at the kitchen table while I finished the apples. He told me about a restaurant renovation downtown and complained about a subcontractor who had ordered the wrong flooring. Then he glanced toward the hallway. "Mom, do you still have Dad's old project files?" "Some of them." "Why, we're cleaning up company records. Anthony thinks there may be old contracts we should digitize. I pointed toward the garage. Most of what I kept is in Samuel's workshop. Marcus hesitated. I noticed it. He hadn't been inside that workshop since shortly after his father's funeral. I can get them, I offered. No, it's fine. He followed me outside. The moment I opened the workshop door, Marcus went quiet. Samuel's tools still lined the wall. His workbench sat beneath the narrow window. Nothing was arranged for display. It was simply a room a working man had stepped out of and never returned to. Marcus ran his hand across the workbench. Still smells the same, sawdust and bad coffee. He smiled. Dad's cologne. I laughed softly. Then his eyes landed on the walnut box. What's that? I stared at him. You don't remember? He picked it up, turning it over in his hands. There were scratches along the sides and a small dent near the latch. Should I, your father, made it with you? Marcus frowned. When you were 12? His expression changed slightly. I could see him searching through memories. Then I remembered the day clearly enough for both of us. It had been July, unbearably hot. Samuel had decided Marcus was old enough to learn how to build something that required patience. Not a birdhouse, not a school project. A proper box with fitted joints. Marcus ruined the first 2 pieces of walnut by measuring incorrectly. He nearly cried. Samuel simply handed him another piece. Measure again. Marcus complained that the mistake had wasted good wood. Samuel shook his head. No, hiding the mistake would waste the wood. Fixing it teaches you something. They worked on that box for 3 weekends. When it was finished, Marcus carried it into the kitchen like he had built a cathedral. I told him that story. He laughed. I actually forgot about this. I didn't. Marcus ran his thumb across the lid. Dad kept everything. He kept things that mattered. Marcus placed the box back on the shelf. Then I remembered something else Samuel had said that summer. You know what your father told you when you finished it? Marcus shook his head. He said, someday, son, you need to remember whose foundation you're building on. Marcus smiled. That sounds like Dad. What do you think he meant? He shrugged. Probably another construction metaphor. Maybe it was. But something about the way Marcus dismissed it bothered me. He began searching through boxes of old project folders. A few minutes later, he said, actually, this might be useful for something we're working on. What? He looked up, suddenly animated. A development project. Marcus told me Brooks and Carter had been approached about joining a residential development outside Richmond. Not renovations, not individual homes, an entire upscale community. Townhouses, detached homes, landscaped common areas, a clubhouse. How large enough to change the company? I stopped sorting papers. That sounds expensive. It is. How expensive? He smiled. You always go straight to the uncomfortable question. Your father married a woman who balanced the household checkbook to the penny. You knew what family you were born into. Marcus laughed. Then he leaned against Samuel's workbench. If this works, Mom, Brooks, and Carter stops being known as a renovation company. We become developers. There was pride in his voice, but there was something else too. Hunger. I had seen ambition in Marcus before. This felt different. What does Anthony think? He's cautious? That means he disagrees. He thinks we should grow slower. And I think sometimes you have to take a risk. What kind of risk? Marcus exhaled. We'd need significant financing, but the projections are strong. Projections aren't guarantees. His smile faded slightly. Nothing in business is guaranteed, I knew that. Samuel knew it too. But Samuel had always distinguished between risking money and risking the foundation underneath you. Does Camille like the idea? I asked. Marcus laughed. She loves it. Of course she did. She knows people connected to the investment group. She's actually the one who introduced us. That caught my attention. Camille brought them to you? She works in high-end real estate, Mom. These are exactly the people she deals with. I nodded. Marcus kept talking. He described renderings, projected home prices, expected demand. His excitement grew with every sentence. Then he said something that stayed with me. If we do this right, nobody will think of Brooks and Carter as Dad's little construction company anymore. The room became very quiet. Marcus seemed not to notice what he had said. I looked around Samuel's workshop. That little construction company had paid our mortgage. It had put Marcus through college. It had provided steady work for men and women who had stayed with Samuel through recessions, injuries, and years when profits were thin. I didn't lecture him. I simply asked, what's wrong with people remembering what your father built? Marcus looked at me. Nothing. But I can't spend my whole life standing in his shadow. There it was. Not arrogance exactly, something sadder. For Marcus' growth had become proof that he was more than Samuel's son. He gathered the folders he needed. At the door, he kissed my cheek. Don't worry, Mom. I know what I'm doing. I hope so. He smiled. You sound like Dad. After his truck disappeared, I returned to the workshop. The walnut box was still on the shelf. I picked it up again. Whose foundation you're building on? For years, I had thought Samuel was simply teaching our son humility. Now I wasn't so sure. Marcus had come looking for old company records. On the same afternoon, he told me he needed enormous financing for the biggest deal of his life. And Camille, the woman who wanted me to throw away Samuel's old things, had introduced the investors. I stood there holding that scratched walnut box and felt the first real knot of uneasiness tighten in my stomach. I didn't know yet what Samuel had left behind, but I was beginning to suspect his words about foundations had never been a metaphor at all. Camille called me 2 days after Marcus came looking for Samuel's old project files. At first there was nothing unusual about the conversation. "Naomi, how are you? I'm fine." Marcus said he stopped by. He did. He seemed really happy afterward. I think being around Samuel's old things was good for him. That sentence surprised me. Camille had never shown much affection for Samuel's old things. Before I could respond, she continued, "I've actually been thinking about you. That sounds dangerous." She laughed a little too loudly. "No, seriously. I know you've had a lot to manage since Samuel passed. It's been 4 years, Camille, I know. But financial things can pile up." There it was. The first question came casually. Did Samuel leave many old accounts open? No. What about properties? What about them? I just mean investments, land, anything like that. Marcus mentioned Samuel sometimes bought parcels through the company. I set down the dish towel I had been folding. "Why are you asking? I'm trying to help." "With what?" Another small laugh. "You're suspicious today." "I'm 68. Suspicion is one of the few things age gives you for free." She ignored that. Camille began talking about estate organization, outdated paperwork, and how easy it was for widows to overlook financial details. Then she asked the question that made me stop smiling. Did Samuel ever keep any ownership in Brooks and Carter after Marcus took over? I stared through my kitchen window. "Why would you need to know that I don't need to know? You just asked." I was curious. Camille changed the subject almost immediately, but the question stayed with me long after the call ended. Samuel had handled the transition of the company himself. I knew Marcus had taken over operations, and I knew Anthony Carter retained an ownership interest. Beyond that, I had trusted Samuel's attorney and accountants to structure everything properly. I had never felt the need to investigate it, until Camille asked. 3 days later, she called again. This time she offered to send someone to help me organize Samuel's remaining papers. "I know a wonderful estate specialist," she said, very discreet. "My papers are organized. You still have boxes in the workshop, old construction files. Exactly, some of those could have legal significance." Her persistence made something inside me sharpen. Camille, is Marcus having trouble with the development deal? Silence, only for a second. But it was there. No. Why would you ask that? "Because suddenly you're very interested in paperwork nobody cared about for 4 years. Her voice cooled. "I'm just trying to make things easier, for me." Of course, I didn't challenge her further. Sometimes the fastest way to learn what someone wants is to stop telling them what you know. "Thank you," I said, "but I can handle my own records." We ended the call politely. I sat at the kitchen table afterward thinking about Marcus, about the folders he'd taken, about the financing he had described, and about Camille asking whether Samuel had retained ownership. The phone rang again that afternoon. I almost didn't answer. Then I saw the name. Patricia Reed. I hadn't spoken to Patricia in nearly 6 months, though we'd known each other for more than 30 years. She had worked as a legal assistant for the attorney Samuel used when his business first became successful. More importantly, she had been our friend. Patricia had sat beside me in the hospital during Samuel's final week. Naomi Patricia. What a surprise. "Do you have time to meet me?" Her tone erased my smile. "What happened? Nothing happened." "Then why do you sound like something did?" She paused. "I need to give you something." I straightened. "What, not over the phone?" We agreed to meet the next morning at a quiet cafe near Bird Park. Patricia was already seated when I arrived. She had a leather handbag beside her chair, and both hands wrapped around a cup of coffee she hadn't touched. After we hugged, I sat down. "You're frightening me." "I don't mean to." "Then tell me why I'm here." She studied my face. "Has Marcus talked to you about a major company transaction?" My stomach tightened. "Yes, recently last week." Patricia slowly nodded. Then she reached into her handbag. She pulled out a cream-colored envelope. It was thick, sealed. My name was written across the front. Naomi. I knew the handwriting instantly. For a moment, the cafe disappeared. Samuel's handwriting had always leaned slightly to the right. His capital N looked almost like an H because he never closed the first stroke properly. I touched the envelope but didn't pick it up. "Where did you get this?" "Samuel gave it to me." I looked at her. "When about 5 months before he died." My throat tightened. "Why didn't you give it to me then?" "Because he told me not to." Patricia opened her handbag again and removed a small brass key. She placed it beside the envelope. The key was old, heavier than a modern house key with a scratched circular head. "Samuel gave me this too." I stared at it. "What does it open?" "I don't know. You never asked." I did. "What did he say?" Patricia's expression softened. "He said if the day came when you needed the key, you'd know where to look." That sounded exactly like Samuel. Even dying, the man couldn't give a simple instruction without turning it into a lesson. "Why now?" I asked. Patricia leaned closer. "Because Samuel gave me one very specific condition." I waited. "He said I was to keep that envelope unless Marcus reached a point where he was about to make a decision that could permanently change the future of the company." A chill moved through me. Patricia continued. "He said if Marcus ever started reaching for something so big that he might risk what had already been built, I should contact you." I looked down at Samuel's handwriting, the development project, the financing, Camille's questions. Suddenly, they no longer felt like separate things. Did Samuel know this would happen? No, not this exact deal. Then why prepare for it? Patricia was quiet for a moment, because he knew his son. That answer hurt more than I expected. I picked up the brass key. It was cold against my palm. "What else did Samuel tell you?" "Very little. He made me promise not to read the envelope. He said the decision had to belong to you. What decision, I don't know." I looked at Patricia, hoping she would tell me this was simply some sentimental arrangement Samuel had made near the end of his life. She didn't. Instead, she reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. "Naomi, there's one more thing." "What?" "When Samuel gave me these, I asked him whether he was afraid Marcus would lose the company." Patricia paused. "He said no. I'm afraid Marcus might become successful enough to believe he can't lose it." I couldn't speak. Marcus had told me only days earlier that sometimes you had to take a risk. Camille had suddenly become interested in ownership documents, and now a dead man had reached across 4 years to place a warning in my hands. I slipped the key and envelope into my purse. As Patricia and I stood to leave, she touched my arm. "Naomi." "Yes, I think the time Samuel was waiting for has come." Walking back to my car, I knew she was right. What I didn't know was that Samuel's warning wasn't only about Marcus's new project. It was about something my son didn't even realize he didn't own. I waited until that evening to open Samuel's envelope. For 6 hours it sat on my kitchen table. I walked past it while making lunch. I looked at it while washing dishes. Twice I picked it up and twice I put it back down. It wasn't fear of what Samuel had written. It was fear of hearing his voice again. Grief does strange things to time. 4 years can pass, and then one familiar curve of handwriting can make you feel as though the person you lost has only been gone since yesterday. At 7:30, I made a cup of tea and sat down. The brass key Patricia had given me rested beside the envelope. I broke the seal. Inside were 2 smaller envelopes. One had my name on it. The other said, "For Marcus, when the time is right." I stared at those words for a long moment. Then I opened mine. "Naomi, if Patricia has given you this, then something I hoped would never happen may be happening." I stopped reading. My eyes filled so quickly that Samuel's handwriting blurred. I took off my glasses and pressed my fingers against them. "Samuel," I whispered. The kitchen was silent. I put my glasses back on. Samuel wrote that he knew Marcus loved the company. He knew our son was capable, intelligent, and hardworking. But Samuel also knew something about Marcus that I had always interpreted more gently. Our son needed to prove himself. Even as a boy, Marcus hated being compared to his father. If a teacher said, "You're handy," like Samuel, Marcus would spend the next month trying to prove he was good at something Samuel couldn't do. When he joined the company, he worked harder than anyone, partly because he never wanted people to say his last name had handed him his career. Samuel understood that. But according to the letter, he had also feared what could happen if Marcus ever confused proving himself with outgrowing everything that came before him. Then I reached a sentence that made me put the letter down. "Don't give him everything simply because he is our son." I felt almost offended on Marcus's behalf. Then I kept reading. "Love makes parents want to remove every obstacle from their children's path," Samuel wrote. "But sometimes an obstacle is the only thing that keeps someone from driving over a cliff." Then came the sentence I would remember later at Marcus's birthday dinner. "Sometimes love has to be a guardrail, Naomi, not an open gate." I leaned back in my chair. Suddenly, Camille's questions sounded even more troubling. Samuel's letter continued. The brass key opened a secured storage compartment in the old Brooks and Carter office building. Samuel wrote that I would find it in the records room behind what used to be his private office. He told me exactly which cabinet to look for. There were documents inside he said that I needed to read before making any decision concerning Marcus or the company. He warned me not to sign anything related to ownership until I had read them. I froze. Marcus had not yet asked me to sign anything. But Camille had been asking about ownership. That coincidence felt too precise to ignore. I continued reading. Samuel explained that years earlier, when Brooks and Carter began expanding, he had watched 2 other family businesses collapse. Not because they were unprofitable, because the second generation borrowed against everything the first generation had built. One bad project had destroyed decades of work. He had never forgotten it. If Marcus is standing in front of you asking for something that feels urgent, Samuel wrote, slow him down. If he becomes angry, let him be angry. B. If someone tells you that you're too old to understand, remember that you helped me build this company before Marcus was old enough to hold a hammer. I laughed through my tears. That was Samuel. He could irritate me from beyond the grave and comfort me in the same paragraph. Then the tone of the letter changed. Do not punish Marcus for being ambitious. Ambition built part of what we have. But ambition without memory becomes entitlement. Give him the opportunity to choose. I read that sentence 3 times. Give him the opportunity to choose. Samuel didn't want me to control our son. He wanted me to create enough resistance that Marcus would have to think. At the bottom of the page was one final instruction. Go to the records room alone first. Read everything. Then decide what Marcus needs to know. I folded the letter carefully. The second envelope remained unopened. For Marcus when the time is right. I touched it. Every instinct in me wanted to open it. I wanted to know what Samuel had written to our son. But the envelope wasn't mine, so I left it sealed. The next morning, I called Anthony Carter. Anthony had worked with Samuel for nearly 20 years. He had started as a project supervisor and eventually became Samuel's business partner, Mrs. Brooks. He still called me that even though I had told him 100 times to use Naomi. Anthony, I need to get into the old records room. There was a pause. Is everything okay? I don't know yet. What are you looking for? Something Samuel left. Another pause. Longer this time. I can meet you there tomorrow. No, I need to go alone first. Anthony didn't argue. I'll have security let you in. That night I went into Samuel's workshop. I don't know why. Maybe I needed to feel close to him before following the last instructions he had ever written for me. The walnut box sat where Marcus had left it. I lifted it from the shelf. Dust had settled into the scratches. I wiped the lid with my sleeve. Then I remembered Marcus, at 12 years old, furious because one corner of the box didn't fit properly. Samuel had made him take it apart. Marcus wanted to cover the gap with wood filler. Samuel refused. You don't hide a weak joint, he told him. You fix it. I had forgotten that part until then. I opened the box. It was empty. But suddenly I knew what I would eventually put inside. Not yet. First I needed to understand what Samuel had protected. I placed his letter to Marcus inside the walnut box temporarily, then set the brass key beside it. The next morning I drove to the old Brooks and Carter building. The company had moved most operations years earlier, but the original property remained in use for storage and archives. A security guard let me inside. The hallway smelled faintly of dust and old carpet. Samuel's former office was empty. Behind it was the records room. Rows of metal filing cabinets filled the space. I followed Samuel's instructions. Back wall, third cabinet, bottom section. There was a small keyhole beneath the handle. My heart began pounding. I took the brass key from my purse. For one strange second, I considered leaving. Whatever was behind that lock had waited 4 years. I could have walked away and remained ignorant. Then I thought of Marcus saying nobody would think of Brooks and Carter as his father's little construction company anymore. I inserted the key. It turned. The lock clicked. Inside were several thick folders, an old corporate ledger, and a blue binder stamped with the name Brooks Family Trust. I stared at those words. I had never seen that binder before, and before I even opened it, I understood one thing. Samuel had not simply left behind memories. He had built a guardrail. And somehow I was standing directly in the middle of it. I stood in that records room with my hand resting on the blue binder for nearly a minute before I opened it. Brooks Family Trust. The words meant something legally. I knew that much. For years I had handled bookkeeping and records when Samuel's company was still small enough that the office consisted of 2 desks, a filing cabinet, and a coffee machine that leaked. But Samuel had never discussed a family trust with me. Not in detail. I carried the binder to an old table beneath the window and sat down. The first pages were exactly what I expected: legal language, dates, definitions, signatures. Then I saw Samuel's name. Below it was mine, Naomi Brooks, trustee. I leaned closer. "What did you do, Samuel?" I began reading more carefully. The trust had been created 7 years earlier, 3 years before Samuel died. Its purpose was described in formal language, but the structure became clearer as I moved through the pages. Brooks & Carter Renovations had 3 ownership interests: Marcus Brooks, Anthony Carter, and the Brooks Family Trust. I stopped. For 4 years I had believed what everyone else seemed to believe, that Samuel had transferred his ownership to Marcus before stepping away from daily operations. Marcus certainly behaved as if that were true. At company events, people introduced him as the owner. Newspaper articles called him the second-generation owner of Brooks & Carter. I had never questioned it, but the ledger in front of me told a different story. Marcus owned 40%, Anthony owned 25%. The remaining 35% belonged to the Brooks Family Trust. I read the numbers again. My hands went cold. 35% wasn't symbolic. It wasn't some tiny retirement holding Samuel had forgotten to transfer. It was a major voting block. And according to the trust agreement, I controlled it, not personally. That distinction mattered. The shares weren't mine to sell casually or use as though they were a checking account. I held them as trustee. But the voting authority was unmistakable. Certain major company actions required approval beyond Marcus's 40%. Large asset sales, changes to ownership structure, extraordinary borrowing secured against core company assets, transactions that could substantially alter control of the business. I thought about Marcus standing in Samuel's workshop. We'd need significant financing. I turned another page. A highlighted paragraph caught my attention. Any waiver or transfer of the trust's voting rights had to be approved by the trustee voluntarily and in writing. No automatic transfer occurred simply because Marcus became president. No deadline required me to surrender the shares. There was no clause saying that when Marcus reached a certain age, the trust disappeared. Samuel had built the structure to remain in place until I made a deliberate decision. My first emotion wasn't power. It was anger. "Why didn't you tell me?" My voice sounded strange in the empty room. Samuel and I had shared nearly everything: bills, debts, plans, fear. When the company nearly failed during its early years, I knew exactly how much money remained in the bank. When Samuel mortgaged his truck to cover payroll, I knew. When we finally made enough to breathe, I knew that too. So why hadn't he explained this? Then I remembered his letter. Sometimes love has to be a guardrail. I opened the old corporate ledger. There were Samuel's handwritten notes beside several entries: Marcus 40%, Anthony 25%, Brooks Family Trust 35%. Beneath that, Samuel had written, "Management is not the same as ownership." I stared at the sentence. Marcus had received operational control. Samuel had trusted him to lead. But he had deliberately prevented any one person from being able to gamble the company's foundation without resistance. I found another folder. Inside were board resolutions documenting the transfer of executive authority to Marcus. The language was clear. Marcus became president. Marcus received authority over ordinary business decisions. Marcus could hire, fire, negotiate contracts, and direct operations, but extraordinary transactions remained subject to the ownership agreements. Suddenly pieces began fitting together. Camille asking whether Samuel retained ownership. Camille offering to organize my financial records. Marcus searching for old documents, the development project, the financing. I felt sick. Did Marcus know about the trust? I searched for evidence that he had signed something acknowledging it. There were documents with his signature related to the 40% transfer, but the trust itself had been established separately. Perhaps Samuel had explained it. Perhaps Marcus had forgotten. Perhaps he had never understood what the structure meant. I didn't know. And that frightened me more than if I had known he was deliberately hiding something. A man preparing the largest transaction of his career should know exactly what he owns. I pulled out Samuel's letter again. Give him the opportunity to choose. I finally understood why Samuel had not instructed me simply to stop Marcus. He wanted Marcus to confront the truth himself. I continued through the cabinet. One folder contained historical financial statements. Another held insurance documents. A third contained copies of property deeds and equipment schedules. They reminded me what Brooks and Carter actually represented. It wasn't just a company valuation, it was the office building. The trucks, the equipment, the contracts, the reputation Samuel and Anthony had spent decades building, and people. I remembered men who had worked with Samuel when Marcus was still in high school. Some were nearing retirement now. Others had children working for the company. If Marcus made a reckless decision, he wouldn't be gambling only his lifestyle. He would be gambling their paychecks too. Footsteps sounded in the hallway. I turned quickly. Anthony Carter appeared in the doorway. He stopped when he saw the open binder. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then his eyes moved to the brass key on the table. "You found it," he said. The words hit me harder than they should have. You knew Anthony stepped inside and closed the door behind him. I knew the trust existed. And Marcus Anthony hesitated. That hesitation answered more than words. "Sit down," I said. "Naomi, sit." He did. I placed the ownership ledger between us. 40% Marcus, 25% you, 35% the trust. Yes. And I'm the trustee. Yes. Does my son know? Anthony rubbed a hand over his jaw. He knows your family trust holds an interest. That isn't what I asked. Anthony looked at me. I don't think Marcus understands how much authority that 35% still carries. My stomach tightened, and the development deal, Anthony's expression changed. What has Marcus told you that it requires significant financing? Anthony leaned back. That's one way of describing it. Give me another. He was silent. Anthony. He looked toward the folders covering the table. If Marcus gets the deal, he wants Brooks and Carter will have to put far more than cash into it. How much more? Enough that I voted against it. I stared at him. Anthony owned 25% and had worked beside Samuel for decades. If he was frightened, I needed to understand why. What exactly is Marcus planning to risk? Anthony met my eyes. Potentially everything Samuel spent his life building. I looked down at the blue binder. 35%. Until that morning, I had thought Samuel left me paperwork. Now I understood. He had left me a vote, and my son was about to need it. Anthony didn't answer my question immediately. Instead, he stood, walked to the records room door, and closed it completely. That small gesture frightened me more than anything he could have said. Tell me everything I said. Anthony returned to the table. The project is called Hawthorne Ridge. I had heard Marcus mention the name once, but only in passing. Anthony pulled a chair closer. It's 78 acres west of Richmond. The plan is for upscale detached homes, townhouses, a clubhouse, walking trails, the whole package. And Brooks and Carter would build it partly. We'd also be investing as a development partner. How much Anthony exhaled. More than we've ever committed to one project. He explained that Brooks and Carter had grown steadily under Marcus. Revenue was strong. Their renovation division was profitable. They had good equipment, manageable debt, and long-term clients. In other words, Samuel had left Marcus a healthy company. Hawthorne Ridge could change that. If it works, Anthony said the return could be enormous. That sounds like Marcus. Anthony gave me a tired smile. Exactly. And if it doesn't work? His smile disappeared. That's the problem. The investment group wanted Brooks and Carter to contribute cash construction capacity and guarantees. What kind of guarantees? Anthony hesitated. Company assets. I felt my shoulders stiffen. Which assets? The headquarters could be included in the collateral package. I stared at him. The building Samuel bought? Yes. What else? Equipment. Certain receivables. Potentially a revolving credit facility tied to operating capital. I had spent enough years around business records to understand what he was saying. This wasn't Marcus investing extra profits. This was Marcus placing pieces of the company itself behind the deal. If the project fails, the lenders could pursue the pledged assets. And payroll could become difficult if the company got squeezed badly enough. How many people work there now? 83 full-time. More when you count regular subcontractors. 83. I pictured families behind that number. Mortgages, college tuition, medical bills, groceries, people who had nothing to do with Marcus wanting to prove he could turn his father's renovation company into a development empire. Why would he agree to this? Anthony rubbed his forehead. Because the projections look very good. You don't believe them. I believe projections are projections. That sounded like Samuel. Anthony continued. The Richmond market has been strong. The investors believe demand will hold. If they're right, Marcus looks brilliant. And if they're wrong, we spend years recovering. If several things go wrong at once, we might not recover. I looked toward the old filing cabinets. Then why hasn't the deal been stopped? Because I only have 25%. And Marcus has 40. Anthony nodded. And the trust has 35. The room became very quiet. So that's why Camille was asking about Samuel's ownership. Anthony looked sharply at me. What did she ask? I told him. The accounts, the property, the old paperwork, whether Samuel had retained shares. Anthony's expression hardened. Camille knows about the trust, how she has attended several planning meetings with Marcus. That surprised me. Why is a real estate agent sitting in company financing meetings? Because she introduced the investment group. There it was again. Marcus had told me that part. But hearing Anthony say it made the connection feel more dangerous. Who are these people? Legitimate investors. I'm not accusing anyone of fraud, Naomi. Then what's your objection? The structure. Anthony explained that Camille had built relationships with several people involved through luxury real estate. She saw Hawthorne Ridge as the opportunity Marcus had been waiting for. She thinks I'm afraid of growth, Anthony said. Are you? No, I'm afraid of leverage. I almost smiled. Samuel would have liked that answer. Does Marcus understand that you voted against it? Yes. And he thinks I'm protecting the past instead of building the future. I looked away. Marcus had said almost the same thing to me. Nobody will think of Brooks & Carter as Dad's little construction company anymore. The words sounded uglier now. Anthony, does Marcus know he needs my approval? He knows the transaction needs the trust dealt with. Dealt with. That's how the attorneys have been describing it. A chill moved through me. What does that mean? The trust's voting rights complicate the financing. The investors don't want a 35% block controlled by someone outside management. I repeated it slowly. After all those years of balancing books at our kitchen table, answering client calls while Samuel was on job sites and helping him make payroll when the company was barely surviving, I had become someone outside management. Anthony seemed embarrassed. I didn't choose the language, but somebody did. Yes. What do they want? They want the trust to waive certain rights or restructure its interest, and that requires my signature. Yes. Everything suddenly made sense. Camille wasn't curious about my finances. She was trying to find out what I knew. Why hasn't Marcus asked me? He probably will. I stood and walked toward the window. The parking lot outside had weeds growing through cracks in the asphalt. I remembered when Samuel had signed the lease on this place decades earlier. We couldn't afford proper office furniture. I bought 2 used desks from a closing insurance agency. Samuel complained they didn't match. I told him profitable companies could buy matching furniture. He never complained again. Now Marcus was willing to risk the building that eventually replaced those desks, not because he was a bad man. That would have been easier. He was a good man who had begun believing success made him incapable of making a bad decision. That was exactly what Samuel had feared. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I asked. Anthony looked uncomfortable. It wasn't my place. 83 employees, Anthony. I know. If this deal can affect their jobs, it became your place. He nodded. You're right. I returned to the table. What happens next? The financing documents are being finalized. When soon? Marcus wants everything moving within the next few weeks. My birthday invitation suddenly felt different. Important clients, investment people, a sophisticated dinner, a celebration of Marcus reaching an important point in his career. Maybe Camille wasn't only celebrating his birthday. Maybe she expected to be celebrating the deal. I closed the Brooks family trust binder. I need copies of everything relevant to my voting rights. Anthony nodded. I'll get them. And don't tell Marcus I came here. Anthony hesitated. For how long? Until he comes to me himself. I slipped Samuel's brass key into my purse. As I walked toward the door, Anthony called my name. Naomi. I turned. Samuel didn't create that trust because he thought Marcus would fail. I know. He was proud of him. I know that, too. Anthony looked at the blue binder. He just believed nobody should have enough power to destroy something valuable without someone making them stop and think first. I drove home with those words following me. That evening, I stood in Samuel's workshop and looked at the walnut box. For the first time, I understood the real shape of the danger. Marcus thought his mother was standing between him and his future, but the truth was much worse. If Anthony was right, I might be standing between my son and the destruction of his father's life's work, and I had a feeling Marcus was about to knock on my door and ask me to move. Marcus came to my house the following Thursday carrying a black leather folder. The moment I saw it, I knew. He didn't mention the company when I opened the door. Instead, he kissed my cheek and held up a paper bag. Peace offering. I looked inside. Blueberry muffins from the bakery I liked. What are you apologizing for? He laughed. Do I need a reason to bring my mother breakfast when you arrive before 9 on a weekday carrying pastries and paperwork? Yes. His smile tightened. I stepped aside. Come in. We sat at the kitchen table. Marcus poured himself coffee while I placed 2 muffins on plates. For nearly 10 minutes, he talked about everything except the folder. Traffic, a client, the weather. Finally, I touched the leather cover. Marcus. He stopped talking. What do you need me to sign? His expression changed. It's nothing dramatic. That wasn't my question. He opened the folder. There are some old ownership issues we're cleaning up before the Hawthorne Ridge project moves forward. Ownership issues. Dad left a few things structured in ways that made sense years ago, but don't really make sense now. I said nothing. Marcus pulled out several documents. There's an old family trust, as if Samuel had accidentally forgotten it in a drawer. I know. Marcus looked up sharply. You know, yes. How your father told me enough. It wasn't the whole truth, but it wasn't a lie. Marcus leaned back. Well, good. Then this should be easier. He pushed the documents toward me. The attorneys need your signature in a few places. I picked up the first page. Marcus reached for his coffee. I started reading. After about 30 seconds, he said, Mom, you don't have to read every word. I looked over my glasses. Why not? Because the attorneys already reviewed it. Did you, of course? I kept reading. The language was dense but not unfamiliar. Years of maintaining company records had taught me how to find the sentences people hoped you would skim. Waiver, voting authority, consent, transfer. I turned the page. Marcus tapped his fingers against the table. It's mostly housekeeping. Housekeeping doesn't usually require 12 pages. It's legal paperwork. That is why I'm reading it. He sighed. The document proposed that the Brooks Family Trust waive several voting protections connected to extraordinary financing. Another section gave authority for restructuring the trust's interest as part of the transaction. If I signed everything in front of me, the 35% would still technically exist, but its ability to stop Hawthorne Ridge would be drastically weakened. I placed the papers down. What exactly are you asking me to give up? Marcus frowned. Nothing. Then why do you need my signature? Because the trust is outdated. Outdated for whom his jaw tightened. Mom. No. Explain it. He pushed his chair back slightly. This is exactly why I didn't want to make this complicated. You didn't want it complicated, or you didn't want me to understand it? His face changed. That's unfair? Is it? Yes. I turned the document around and pointed to a paragraph. This waives voting protections, only for this transaction. And this section, it allows restructuring, which means it gives us flexibility. That's not an answer. Marcus stood. He walked to the kitchen counter, then turned back. Why are you doing this, reading, interrogating me? I'm asking what you're requesting from me. You're acting like I'm trying to steal something. I didn't say that. You don't have to. I watched him carefully. Marcus, what assets are securing Hawthorne Ridge? His expression froze, only briefly. But I saw it. Where did you hear that? That doesn't matter. Did Anthony talk to you? Answer the question. Marcus stared at me. Some company assets are involved. Which ones, Mom? The headquarters. Silence. Equipment. He looked away. Operating credit. It's more complicated than that. No, Marcus. It's more dangerous than you told me. His voice rose. You don't understand the structure. Then explain it. I don't have 2 hours to teach you commercial financing. The words landed between us. I felt something inside me go very still. Marcus seemed to realize how he sounded. That's not what I meant. Yes, it is. He sat down again. Mom, this company is different now. Deals are bigger. Financing is more sophisticated. I know. You haven't been involved in years. I know that too. Then trust me. There it was. The word he wanted to substitute for information. Trust. I looked at my son. Did you read every page of these documents? Yes. I held his gaze. Marcus looked away first. Most of them. Most the lawyers handled the details. And Camille, his eyes returned to mine. What about her? Has she read them? She's been involved. How involved? She introduced us to the investors. You know that. Did she tell you the trust needed my signature? Everyone knows that. Everyone except me, apparently. I folded my hands. I'm not signing. Marcus stared at me. What not today? Mom, we're on a timeline. Then you should have come sooner. This isn't something you can just delay because you're uncomfortable. It is when my signature is required. His face flushed. Do you even understand what you're stopping? Do you? That did it? Marcus stood so quickly his chair scraped across the floor. I have spent 4 years building this company beyond anything Dad ever imagined. And I'm proud of that. No, you're not. Every time I try to move forward, you drag Dad into it. I didn't mention your father. You don't have to. This house does it for you. That workshop does it. Every old tool you refuse to throw away. I stared at him. For a second, I wondered whether those were Marcus's words or words he had heard often enough from someone else that they had become his. He gathered the papers. You're standing in the way of my future. My throat tightened. Your future, yes. Or one deal you wouldn't understand. I almost laughed, but there was nothing funny about it. I had helped Samuel survive years when we didn't know whether the company would make payroll. I had sat at this same kitchen table calculating which bills could wait. And now my son believed I couldn't understand risk. "Maybe I don't understand your world," I said quietly, "but I understand what happens when someone asks you to sign away protection and tells you there's no time to read." Marcus shoved the documents into his folder. "I can't believe you're doing this." I stood. "Neither can I." He headed toward the door. Before leaving, he turned. "Dad wanted me to have this company, I know. Then why are you trying to control it? I'm not. It feels like you are." I thought of Samuel's letter. If he becomes angry, let him be angry. So I did. Marcus left without taking the muffins. Through the window, I watched his truck disappear. Then I went to Samuel's workshop. The walnut box sat on the bench. I opened it. Inside were the brass key and Samuel's sealed letter to Marcus. For the first time, I considered giving it to him immediately, but I stopped. Samuel hadn't told me to rescue Marcus from anger. He had told me to give our son an opportunity to choose. That evening, my phone rang. Camille. I looked at her name on the screen and knew Marcus had already told her. I answered. "Hello." Her voice was calm, too calm. "Naomi, I think you and I need to have a conversation." I looked toward Samuel's workshop through the kitchen window. "Yes, Camille," I said, "I think we do." Camille didn't waste much time pretending the call was friendly. I heard Marcus stopped by. "He did. And you refused to sign." "I refused to sign today." "A small distinction, but an important one." Camille sighed. "Naomi, do you understand how much pressure he's under? Do you?" The question caught her off guard. What is that supposed to mean? "It means Marcus came to my house with 12 pages of legal documents and expected me to sign them without reading them. They've been reviewed by professionals." So I was told. "Then what exactly is the problem?" "The problem is that my signature is mine." There was silence. When Camille spoke again, the warmth had disappeared. "I think you're making this personal." "No, I'm making it careful. You don't trust Marcus. I trust my son enough to ask him questions." "You embarrassed him." I almost laughed. "In my own kitchen, he walked out feeling like you think he's incompetent. That wasn't my intention. Intentions don't matter when someone feels undermined." That sounded almost rehearsed. I moved to the kitchen window. Samuel's workshop was visible beyond the garage. "Camille, why does Hawthorne Ridge require the trust to waive its voting protections?" Another silence. "You've been talking to Anthony." That isn't an answer. "Anthony has never wanted this deal." "Why?" "Because Anthony thinks small." I closed my eyes. Marcus had called his father's company small. Now Camille was using the same language about the man who had helped build it. "Small isn't always the same as foolish," I said. "And cautious isn't always the same as wise, no. But caution usually deserves an explanation before you remove it." Camille's voice sharpened. "You don't understand the opportunity in front of Marcus." "Then explain it." "Hawthorne Ridge could triple the development side of the business, and what could it cost? Every investment has risk. How much you're asking the wrong questions." That sentence chilled me. "No, Camille. I'm finally asking the right ones." She exhaled hard. "Marcus has spent years trying to step out of Samuel's shadow, and every time he gets close, someone reminds him of what his father would have done. I haven't asked him to be Samuel." "You don't have to. You keep that house exactly the same. You keep Samuel's workshop like a museum. You keep all those old files and tools." "Stop." She did. I rarely raised my voice. I didn't need to then. "My husband is not the subject of this conversation. He is the subject of everything with you." "No, the subject is why you need my signature." Camille went quiet. I continued. "Is the headquarters being used as collateral?" Her silence answered first. "Who told you that?" "So it is. It's part of a broader financing structure." "What about equipment, Naomi operating capital? Her patience broke." "Yes, some company assets support the financing." "That's normal." "Normal. That was the word people used when they wanted risk to sound harmless." "Does Marcus know all of it?" "Of course he does. All of it. He's the president of the company." That wasn't my question. Camille's voice became defensive. "He has advisors, and you're one of them. I've helped connect him to people who can take Brooks and Carter to the next level. Do those people lose their headquarters if the project fails?" She didn't answer. "Do they lose their equipment?" "That's not how it works." "Then tell me how it works." "You're twisting everything." "No, I'm listening." That was when Camille said more than she meant to. "The company has enough equity to absorb the guarantees. The headquarters is worth far more than what Samuel paid for it. The equipment can be replaced. And if operating cash gets tight, there are credit options." I gripped the phone more tightly. She had just confirmed Anthony's warning. This wasn't surplus money. This was the infrastructure of the company. And if home sales slow, I asked, "They won't. You know that the projections are excellent. Projections aren't promises. Oh, please. The contempt in those 2 words was unmistakable. Naomi, this is exactly what I'm talking about. You still think like someone balancing receipts at a kitchen table. I went very still. For years I had done exactly that. And some months those receipts were the only reason Samuel knew whether he could make payroll. You're right, I said. Camille hesitated. I am. I do remember balancing receipts at a kitchen table. I remember when this company had 3 employees and 1 truck. I remember Samuel skipping his own paycheck so someone else's children could have Christmas. That was 30 years ago. Yes, business has changed. Consequences haven't. Her voice dropped. This isn't really about the financing, is it? What do you think it's about? You don't like that Marcus listens to me. I almost felt sorry for her then. Not because she was right, because she seemed incapable of imagining a concern that wasn't about control. I want Marcus to listen to anyone who tells him the truth. I tell my husband the truth. Then you won't mind him reading every document himself. She didn't respond. That silence told me something. Maybe Marcus knew the general risk. Maybe he didn't know the full extent. Either way, he wasn't asking enough questions. Camille finally said, You're going to regret making this difficult. Is that a threat? No, it's reality. Marcus is trying to build something for his future. So was Samuel. Again, silence. Then Camille laughed once without humor. Samuel. Always Samuel. He built the company you're asking me to help risk, and Marcus made it valuable. I let that sit. Both things could be true. That was what Camille didn't seem to understand. Finally, she said, His birthday is next week. Can we at least not turn dinner into another argument about old paperwork I wasn't planning to? Good. And honestly, Naomi Marcus has everything he needs. Please don't bring another sentimental keepsake. I looked toward the workshop. Why? Because he doesn't need more old things. There was that word again. Old. I'll choose my own gift. Camille sighed. Fine. Maybe this year give him something useful for once. The line went quiet. She had hung up. I remained by the window with the phone in my hand. Strangely, I wasn't angry. I knew exactly what Marcus's gift would be. I walked outside and entered Samuel's workshop. The walnut box waited on the bench. I cleaned the dust from it carefully. Then I opened it. First, I placed the brass key inside. Next came an old photograph I found in Samuel's desk, 12-year-old Marcus, standing beside his father, both covered in sawdust, holding that very box between them. Finally, I took out the sealed envelope. For Marcus, when the time is right. I placed it on top. Camille wanted me to give my son something useful. I closed the lid. She had no idea how useful Samuel's final gift was about to become, and neither did Marcus. The night of Marcus's birthday dinner, I almost left the walnut box in my car. I sat behind the steering wheel outside the restaurant for several minutes, watching people disappear through tall glass doors beneath warm lights. The box rested on the passenger seat. It looked almost embarrassingly small. Camille had chosen one of Richmond's most expensive steakhouses. She had reserved a private dining room in the back, and when I walked inside, I immediately understood what she had meant when she told me this wasn't going to be one of our usual family dinners. There were crystal glasses, white linen dark wood walls, and servers moving so quietly they seemed trained not to disturb the money in the room. Camille saw me first. Naomi, you made it. She kissed the air beside my cheek. Her eyes dropped immediately to the box in my hands. For half a second, something passed across her face. Disappointment. Then she smiled. You brought something. I did. She didn't ask what it was. Marcus is over there. My son stood near the bar talking with 3 men I recognized from local business events. He looked confident in a navy suit, laughing with one hand in his pocket. For a moment, I simply watched him. I remembered a boy wearing Samuel's oversized work boots. Then Marcus noticed me. Mom. His face softened. He came over and hugged me. A real hug. Happy birthday, I whispered. Thanks for coming, I wouldn't miss it. His eyes moved to the walnut box. Something flickered in his expression. Is that from Dad's workshop, yes? Before he could ask more, Camille called him away to greet another guest. I carried the box to my seat. Anthony Carter was already there. When he noticed it, his eyes narrowed. Is that what I think it is? Maybe. What are you doing, Naomi, giving my son a birthday present? Anthony studied me. Then he nodded once. He understood enough not to ask another question. By 7:30, more than 20 people filled the room. There were clients, developers, real estate contacts, and several longtime friends of Marcus and Camille. I recognized 2 people Anthony had identified as being connected to Hawthorne Ridge. That made the evening feel less like a birthday celebration and more like a performance. Camille was very good at performances. She stood beside Marcus while someone offered a toast about leadership vision and the next chapter of Brooks and Carter. Everyone raised their glasses. I watched Anthony. He didn't smile. Dinner lasted nearly 2 hours. Conversation moved from vacations to real estate to investments. Several people congratulated Marcus on what was coming next. Nobody named Hawthorne Ridge directly. They didn't have to. Marcus seemed happier than I had seen him in months. That made what I was about to do harder. I didn't want to humiliate my son. I wanted to reach him. After dessert, Camille announced that it was time for gifts. I hadn't realized adults still opened birthday presents in front of a room full of people, but apparently this was part of the evening she had designed. The first gift was an expensive bottle of bourbon. Then came a leather briefcase. A client gave Marcus a set of golf clubs. Another handed him a sleek box containing wireless electronics I couldn't identify. People laughed and applauded. Then Camille stood. I saved mine for last. She handed Marcus a glossy black box. Inside was a luxury watch. I didn't need to know the brand to know it cost more than my first car. Marcus looked genuinely surprised. "Camille, you deserve it." She kissed him while everyone applauded. Then she glanced toward me. "And I think your mom brought something too." The room turned. I felt suddenly aware of every scratch on Samuel's walnut box. I lifted it from the chair beside me and walked toward Marcus. "Happy birthday." I placed it in front of him. He stared at it. Recognition came slowly. "Wait, is this the box from Dad's workshop, yes?" Before I could say anything else, Camille laughed, not a polite laugh, a sharp one. "Oh my God, Naomi." The room went quiet enough for me to hear a glass being placed on a table. Camille touched the edge of the box. "You actually brought it." Marcus looked uncomfortable. "Camille, what? I'm sorry." She wasn't. She looked toward the guests. I told Naomi Marcus didn't need anything sentimental. A few people smiled awkwardly. Nobody knew where to look. Camille continued. "Didn't you say this thing was sitting in the garage workshop?" I said. She waved a hand. "Same difference." "It isn't." Marcus gave me an apologetic smile. "Mom, you didn't have to bring me anything. I know." Camille examined one of the worn corners. "This looks like something you'd find at a yard sale." Someone at the far end of the table laughed. Then another person chuckled. And Marcus laughed too. It wasn't cruel. That almost made it worse. It was the embarrassed laugh of a man trying to make an uncomfortable moment disappear. But all I heard was my son joining the people laughing at something his father had built with him. For a second I saw 12-year-old Marcus again, covered in sawdust, holding the same box against his chest, proud. I felt something break quietly inside me. Camille smiled at me. "You should have let me help you shop." I didn't answer her. I looked only at Marcus. "Open it." His laughter faded. "Mom, open the box." "Marcus." Something in my voice changed the room. Marcus looked at me, then at Anthony. Anthony said nothing. Slowly, Marcus lifted the brass latch. The lid opened. The first thing he saw was the photograph. He picked it up. His face changed immediately. "Where did you find this?" In the picture, Samuel was kneeling beside him in the workshop. Marcus was 12. Both were smiling. The walnut box sat between them. Then Marcus saw the brass key. He lifted it. "What does this open?" I didn't answer. Finally, he saw the envelope. The color drained from his face. His thumb moved across the handwriting. "Dad." The word barely left his mouth. Camille leaned closer. "What is it?" Marcus didn't respond. He turned the envelope over. The seal was intact. For Marcus, he read softly. Then underneath, "When the time is right." Nobody laughed now. The expensive watch sat forgotten beside his plate. Marcus looked at me. "You've had this not for as long as you think." "What does it say?" "I don't know." That surprised him. I never opened it. His eyes returned to the envelope. Across the table, Anthony leaned forward. Camille's expression had changed from amusement to irritation. "Marcus," she said, "you don't have to do this here." I looked at her. For the first time all evening, she seemed nervous. Marcus noticed too. He slid his finger beneath the seal. The room became completely silent. Then my son unfolded the last letter his father had ever written to him. He read the first line. His mouth tightened. By the third paragraph, his eyes were wet. And when he reached the page that mentioned the Brooks Family Trust, Marcus stopped reading. He looked up at me, then at Anthony, then slowly at Camille. The laughter was gone. But Samuel wasn't finished speaking yet. Marcus stared at the letter so long that Camille finally reached toward him. "What does it say?" He moved the paper away from her hand. It was a small movement, but I noticed it. So did she, Marcus. He didn't answer. The room that had been full of laughter 20 minutes earlier had become painfully quiet. Even the people who didn't know Samuel understood they were witnessing something private. Marcus lowered his eyes and started again from the beginning. This time he read parts aloud. "Son, if you're reading this, then your mother decided the time was right." His voice cracked slightly on the word mother. He cleared his throat. "I wish I could be sitting across from you when you read this. If I can't, then remember that nothing written here was meant to punish you." Marcus stopped. His thumb moved over the edge of the paper. I could almost see him fighting to keep himself composed. Camille shifted beside him. "Maybe you should read it later." "No." Marcus's answer was immediate. He continued, "Samuel wrote about a summer when Marcus was 12. I knew the story before Marcus reached the second paragraph. Mrs. Evelyn Parker had lived 3 streets away from us. Her husband had died that spring, and a summer storm damaged part of her roof. She couldn't afford the repair. Samuel found out. One Saturday morning he loaded tools and shingles into his truck and told Marcus to get dressed. Marcus had been furious. He was supposed to go swimming with friends. Instead, Samuel made him spend the entire day carrying shingles up a ladder. At the end, Mrs. Parker brought them lemonade and tried to hand Samuel an envelope. He refused it. On the drive home, Marcus asked why they had worked all day for free. Samuel's answer appeared in the letter. "There are things a man builds that never appear on an invoice." Marcus stopped reading. His eyes closed. "I remember that," I whispered. "I know." He looked at me. "Dad made me go back Sunday morning because I left nails in her yard." A soft laugh escaped Anthony. "Sounds like Samuel." For the first time that evening, the laughter in the room felt warm. Marcus returned to the letter. Samuel wrote that Brooks and Carter had never been built simply to make the Brooks family wealthy. The company survived because clients trusted them, because employees stayed, because subcontractors knew Samuel would pay what he promised, because people remembered how they had been treated when nobody important was watching. Then Marcus read a line that seemed to strike him physically. "I didn't build this company so you could look rich, son." His eyes flicked toward the expensive watch beside his plate. Camille folded her arms. Marcus continued, "I built it so our family could live without ever having to sell our name, our word, or our dignity to become rich." Nobody moved. I thought of Camille telling me that I still thought like someone balancing receipts at a kitchen table. Samuel's next paragraph brought me back to those very nights. He wrote about the first years of the business. There were months when he and I paid employees before paying ourselves. There were winters when we worried whether enough contracts would come in. Marcus had been too young to understand most of it, but Samuel wanted him to know the company wasn't born from confidence. It was born from responsibility. Then the letter shifted. Samuel wrote, "Ambition is not your enemy. Forgetting what your ambition is standing on might be." Marcus lowered the letter. His face had changed. The confident businessman from the beginning of dinner was gone. I saw my son. Not the president of Brooks and Carter, not Camille's successful husband, just Marcus. He looked toward me. "Mom, did you know he felt this way, some of it? Why didn't he tell me maybe he tried?" That answer hurt both of us. Marcus looked down again. The next section was shorter, but it was the section that changed the room. If you're reading this because a major decision is in front of you, then there's something you need to understand about the company. Marcus's eyes moved faster, then stopped. He read silently, his forehead tightened. He turned the page back as though he thought he had misunderstood what Camille asked. Marcus looked at me. "What is the Brooks Family Trust?" Nobody answered immediately. Then Anthony spoke. "It's an ownership trust Samuel established." Marcus turned toward him. "You knew about this. I knew it existed." How much? Anthony glanced at me. I didn't rescue him. 35%, he said. Marcus stared. 35% of what voting ownership? The words seemed to hang in the air. Marcus laughed once, but there was no humor in it. "No, I own the company." "You own 40%, Anthony said. "And you own 25? "Yes." Marcus looked at me. "And Mom owns 35. The trust owns it," I said. "I control the voting rights as trustee." His mouth opened, then closed. Camille suddenly leaned forward. "That's impossible." Anthony's expression hardened. "It isn't. Marcus was told the company transferred to him. Operational control did. That is not the same thing." "No," Anthony said. "It isn't." Marcus looked back at Samuel's letter. His hands had begun trembling slightly. The room was no longer merely quiet. It felt charged. Camille stared at the scratched walnut box. 10 minutes earlier, she'd called it something you'd find at a yard sale. Now she understood what it had delivered to the table. 35% of a company worth millions. But I knew that wasn't Samuel's real gift. Marcus read again. Dad says the trust wasn't created to keep the company from me. He looked at Anthony. Anthony nodded. Marcus continued silently. Then he whispered, he says it was created to keep one person from making a decision that could destroy everyone else's work. Camille's face tightened. This is ridiculous. Marcus looked at her. What, your father set up some old-fashioned control mechanism because he didn't trust you? No, I said. Camille turned toward me. I held her gaze. He trusted Marcus enough to give him leadership. He just didn't believe leadership should mean nobody could tell you no. Marcus stared at the letter. Then he noticed something. There's another page. My stomach tightened. I hadn't known how long Samuel's letter was because I had never opened it. Marcus separated the sheets. A final page had been folded behind the others. At the top, Samuel had written one sentence in larger letters. Marcus read it aloud. Before you make the biggest decision of your life, read this page twice. Anthony's expression changed. Camille went completely still. Marcus read the page silently once. Then, exactly as his father instructed, he started again. Halfway through the second reading, he slowly lifted his eyes toward Camille. Confusion appeared first, then disbelief. Camille, he said quietly, what exactly did you tell me was being used to guarantee Hawthorne Ridge? She didn't answer. And in that moment, I knew Samuel's final page contained something far more important than 35% of a company. It contained the question my son should have asked before he ever agreed to risk it. Camille's face changed so subtly that I might have missed it if I hadn't been watching her. Her lips tightened. Her shoulders stiffened. Then she reached for her wine. Marcus, this isn't the place. Marcus didn't move. What exactly did you tell me was being used to guarantee Hawthorne Ridge? Several guests suddenly found their plates fascinating. Camille lowered her glass. We've discussed the financing. That's not what I asked. His voice was quiet. That frightened me more than shouting would have. Camille glanced at me, then at Anthony. This is clearly something Anthony has been feeding your mother. Anthony leaned back. Leave me out of your marriage. You're already in it. No, Marcus said. Camille turned toward him. Marcus held Samuel's final page in one hand. Dad wrote something here. Camille gave a short, impatient breath. Samuel died 4 years ago. He didn't know anything about Hawthorne Ridge. No, but he knew something about me. That silenced her. Marcus looked down and began reading aloud. If the day comes when you are about to risk what we built for the promise of something bigger, ask yourself one question before you sign anything. Marcus paused. Then he read the next line. If this fails, what will the people who work for you lose? Anthony lowered his eyes. I thought of the 83 employees. Marcus continued reading. If the answer is only your own money, then make your decision and live with it. If the answer includes other people's livelihoods, homes, retirement, or years of work, then you owe them more than confidence. You owe them caution. Marcus stopped. The room was silent. Samuel had been gone 4 years, yet somehow he had become the strongest voice at that table. Marcus looked at Anthony. Tell me exactly what's pledged. Anthony hesitated. Marcus, everything, Camille interrupted. We are not doing a financing review at your birthday dinner. Marcus didn't even look at her. Anthony exhaled. The current draft includes a first position security interest in several company assets. Which assets? The headquarters property is part of the collateral package. Marcus's expression changed. Camille immediately said, which you knew. Marcus looked at her. I knew the building was referenced as support. That means collateral. No. The way you explained it, the property was part of the company's equity profile. Camille shook her head. That's semantics. Apparently not. Anthony continued. Certain equipment assets are included. Marcus turned back to him. How much equipment? Most of the heavy equipment purchased directly by Brooks and Carter. I watched Marcus absorb that. And operating cash? Anthony rubbed his jaw. The revolving credit facility could be affected if certain performance thresholds aren't met. Marcus stared at him. Could payroll be affected? In a severe downside scenario? Yes. How severe? Not impossible. Marcus looked down. For the first time all evening I saw fear. Not embarrassment, not anger. Fear. How many people are on payroll now? 83 full-time. Marcus closed his eyes. I knew he was thinking of them. Some had worked there since he was young. People whose names he knew. People who had watched him grow up. Camille leaned toward him. Marcus, you're letting them make this sound catastrophic. Every development deal has downside scenarios. He opened his eyes. You told me we were primarily risking surplus capital. We are. Anthony just said the headquarters is collateral. The headquarters has enormous equity. That doesn't make it surplus. Camille's face hardened. You're twisting my words because you're emotional. Marcus almost smiled, but there was no amusement in it. My father just spoke to me from 4 years in the grave, Camille. I think I'm allowed to be emotional. She sat back. Marcus looked at Anthony again. Are the documents final? Not yet. Would the deal go through if Mom signed the waivers? It would clear one of the biggest remaining obstacles. Marcus looked at me. You knew I learned recently, and you refused to sign because of this. I refused because you couldn't explain what you were asking me to surrender. He lowered his head. That landed harder than I intended. I thought I could, he said. Camille pushed her chair back. This is unbelievable. Nobody responded. She looked around the table. A successful company uses leverage. That's how growth works. You don't become a serious developer by behaving like a neighborhood contractor forever. Anthony's jaw tightened. Marcus stared at her. A neighborhood contractor. Camille realized too late what she had said. I didn't mean Samuel. You meant the company he built. I meant the old model. Marcus looked toward the walnut box, then at the photograph of himself beside his father. You know what Dad's old model did? Camille didn't answer. It survived. The words were quiet. They survived recessions, bad clients, material shortages. Dad got sick and the company still survived. Because businesses evolve. Yes, but evolution isn't the same as betting the foundation. My chest tightened when Marcus said it. Foundation, Samuel's word. For the first time in years, Marcus sounded like he remembered. Camille looked at me. This is what you wanted, isn't it? No. To turn him against me. If I wanted that, I would have opened Samuel's letter myself and chosen which parts Marcus heard. She had no response. I didn't. I continued. I gave it to him sealed. Marcus looked at the envelope. He knew that was true. Camille turned back to him. Marcus, please. We can talk about this at home. He studied her for several seconds. Then he asked one question. Did you know the headquarters and equipment were explicitly pledged when you told me this was mostly surplus capital? Camille's eyes moved toward Anthony. That was enough. Marcus saw it. So did I. He slowly sat back. Oh my God, Marcus, you knew. I knew there were guarantees. You knew. I believed the risk was manageable. That wasn't your decision to make for me. I was trying to help you stop being afraid. Marcus stared at her. I wasn't afraid. No, Anthony was. Your mother is. Everyone around you keeps telling you to stay small. Marcus looked down at Samuel's letter. Then he said something I hadn't expected. Maybe I should have been a little afraid. Camille fell silent. Marcus folded the letter carefully. The anger had drained from his face. What remained was worse. Disappointment. But before anyone could speak again, Anthony reached into the leather portfolio beside his chair. There's something else you should see before tomorrow morning. Marcus looked at him. What? Anthony placed a folder on the table. The actual financing summary. Camille went pale, and for the first time that night my son didn't ask his wife what it meant. He reached for the documents himself. By the time the last dessert plates were cleared, most of the guests had understood that the birthday dinner was over. No announcement was necessary. People began leaving quietly. Some hugged Marcus. Others shook his hand and wished him a happy birthday with the strained politeness people use after witnessing something they know they'll discuss privately later. Within 20 minutes, only 4 of us remained. Marcus, Camille, Anthony, and me. The expensive watch still sat beside Marcus's plate. The walnut box sat directly in front of him. He was reading Anthony's financing summary. For once he wasn't skimming. He read every line. Camille sat with her arms folded. Finally, Marcus placed the papers down. The headquarters is explicitly listed. Yes, Anthony said. And the equipment schedule, attachment C. Marcus flipped to it. His jaw tightened. 26 vehicles and heavy equipment. The credit line. Anthony pointed to another section. Marcus read silently. Then he leaned back. You voted against this twice, and I kept pushing. Yes. Marcus looked toward Camille. She immediately shook her head. Don't what? Turn this into me versus Anthony. I'm asking you a question. No. You've already decided I'm the villain because your mother brought a letter from your dead father to your birthday. Marcus flinched. So that's what you think happened? I think everyone is emotional. Anthony started gathering his papers. Camille pointed at him. And he has wanted this project dead from the beginning. Anthony stopped, because I thought the leverage was excessive, because you don't want Marcus growing beyond you. Anthony almost smiled. I own 25% of the company, Camille. If Marcus makes it more valuable, I make more money. She had no answer. Anthony opened his folder again. I didn't want to do this tonight. Do what Marcus asked. Show you why I stopped trusting the summaries you were receiving. Camille's expression changed. Anthony removed several printed emails. These are from the financing meetings. Camille looked at them. I know what they are. Marcus turned toward her. You were in all of these. I told you I was involved. Anthony slid the first email across the table. 3 weeks ago, the lenders asked whether the headquarters could be included in the collateral package. Marcus read. The message showed Camille copied on the discussion. Another email followed. It referenced equipment. Another addressed the operating credit facility. Camille's name appeared again. Marcus looked up. You knew. I knew they were discussing options. This says they were requirements. Requirements change during negotiations, but you knew. Her voice rose. Yes, Marcus, I knew there were guarantees. Then why did you keep calling it surplus capital? Because I didn't want you panicking over language lawyers use in every deal. Marcus stared at her. You decided what I was allowed to worry about. I was trying to keep you focused. On signing. On growing. The word echoed through the empty dining room. Camille stood. You've talked about this for years. You said you were tired of people introducing you as Samuel Brooks's son. You said you wanted Brooks and Carter to become something bigger. Marcus didn't answer. Don't sit there pretending I invented your ambition. That hit him. Because she was right. I saw it in his face. Camille hadn't created the part of Marcus that wanted Hawthorne Ridge. She had encouraged it. She had fed it. But it had already existed. Marcus looked at the papers again. You're right. Camille seemed surprised. I am. I wanted this deal. Her shoulders relaxed slightly. I wanted people to stop talking about what Dad built and start talking about what I built. Exactly. Marcus shook his head. That doesn't make what you did okay. Camille's expression hardened again. I believed in you. Believing in me would have meant giving me all the information and trusting me to decide. I knew what you'd do. What you'd listen to Anthony. Anthony said nothing. You'd hesitate. Camille continued. You'd start hearing your father's voice in your head. Then you'd retreat. Marcus looked at Samuel's letter. Maybe hearing his voice would have saved me a lot of trouble. Camille laughed bitterly. There, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Marcus stood. No, Camille, you still don't understand. He placed both palms on the table. My father isn't the reason this deal is in trouble. He pointed to himself. I am. The room went silent. Marcus continued. I didn't read everything. Camille opened her mouth. He raised a hand. I let attorneys summarize documents I should have read myself. I let you tell me what the financing meant because I liked the version you gave me. His voice weakened. I liked hearing that I could have everything without risking too much. He looked at Anthony. You warned me. Anthony nodded. I called you scared. You did. Then Marcus looked at me. And Mom asked me what I was putting up as collateral. I remembered my kitchen. His anger. You wouldn't understand. Marcus swallowed. I told her she couldn't understand commercial financing. You were angry, I said. No. He shook his head. I was arrogant. I didn't correct him. Some truths have to be allowed to hurt. Marcus picked up the photograph from the walnut box. His 12-year-old self smiled beside Samuel. I laughed at this tonight. My chest tightened. Marcus, no, Mom. Let me say it. He looked at the scratched box. I laughed because I was embarrassed that my mother gave me something old in front of people I wanted to impress. His voice cracked. And 10 minutes later, that old thing was the only reason I started asking the right questions. Camille looked away. I reached across the table and touched the box. Your father didn't leave you a trap, Marcus. He looked at me. He left you a break. Marcus stared at me for a long moment. Then he looked down at Samuel's letter. Anthony broke the silence. The signing is scheduled for 10 tomorrow morning. Marcus slowly nodded. Camille turned to him. You cannot make this decision tonight. I'm not. Relief flashed across her face. Then Marcus continued, because there won't be a signing tomorrow. Camille froze. What I'm postponing it, you'll lose the deal. Then I'll lose it, Marcus. I've spent months telling everyone I'm brave enough to take a risk. He gathered the financing papers. Tomorrow I'm going to find out whether I'm brave enough to admit I almost took the wrong one. Camille stared at him. Marcus slipped Samuel's letter back into the walnut box and closed the lid. For the first time that night, he didn't look ashamed of it. And when he walked out of the restaurant carrying that scratched old box beneath his arm, the expensive watch Camille had given him was still sitting on the table. Marcus canceled the Hawthorne Ridge signing at 8:12 the next morning. I know the exact time because he called me 3 minutes later. Mom, I had barely finished making coffee. Yes, I stopped it. I closed my eyes. Not because I was relieved about the money, because for the first time in weeks, Marcus sounded like my son instead of a man racing to prove something. What happens now, Anthony and I are going through everything. Everything, every page. There was a pause. I should have done that before. I didn't say I told you so. Samuel had hated that phrase. He used to say that if someone had finally recognized a mistake rubbing their face in, it only taught them to hide the next one. So I simply said, good. For the next 4 days, I barely heard from Marcus. Anthony called once. They had brought in an independent financial advisor and instructed the company's attorney to model several downside scenarios. The results weren't pretty. Hawthorne Ridge could have been extremely profitable if home prices remained strong, construction costs stayed within estimates, interest rates behaved, and the sales schedule stayed on target. But businesses don't live inside perfect projections. In one moderate downturn scenario, Brooks and Carter could face years of pressure. In a worse scenario, they could be forced to sell equipment, cut staff, and refinance company property. And in the scenario Anthony feared most, the company could lose control of assets Samuel had spent decades building. The project wasn't fraudulent. The investors weren't criminals. It was simply a risk Marcus had not fully understood because he had been too eager to believe the best version of the future. On Sunday afternoon, a truck pulled into my driveway. Marcus. He got out alone. No Camille, no attorney, no leather folder. He carried only Samuel's walnut box. I opened the door before he could knock. Coffee. He gave me a tired smile. Please. We sat at the same kitchen table where less than 2 weeks earlier he'd asked me to sign away the trust's protections. This time he didn't put anything in front of me. For a while Marcus simply held his mug. Then he said, "We're not doing Hawthorne Ridge." "Are you sure?" "Yes." "Because of the trust." No, that answer mattered. He looked at me. "The trust forced us to stop, but the numbers killed the deal." I nodded. Marcus rubbed both hands over his face. Anthony showed me 3 scenarios. In the best one, we make more money than Brooks and Carter has ever made from a single project. And the others, in one we survive but spend years paying for it. He stared into his coffee. In the worst one, I start deciding which employees I can afford to keep. His voice changed. 83 people, I know. Dad knew some of them. Yes, Raymond still works there. I smiled faintly. Your father hired Raymond when you were 14. He has 3 grandchildren now. Marcus swallowed. I was willing to put his job at risk because I wanted people to call me a developer. There wasn't much I could say to that. He had already said the important part. After a moment, Marcus placed the walnut box on the table. I read Dad's letter again. How many times 6? That sounds excessive. He laughed softly. It was the first genuine laugh I'd heard from him since his birthday. Then his face became serious. There's something I need to say. I waited. I'm sorry. For what? He looked surprised. Everything. No, be specific. Samuel would have appreciated that. Marcus nodded. For treating you like you didn't understand business. He looked around the kitchen. For forgetting you were here before Brooks and Carter was Brooks and Carter. His eyes returned to mine. For assuming that because Dad was the one on job sites he built everything alone. My throat tightened. Marcus continued. For coming here with papers I hadn't fully read and expecting you to sign them because I was your son. He stopped. Then his eyes dropped to the walnut box. And for that dinner. I didn't speak. His fingers moved over one of the scratches. The thing I keep thinking about isn't what Camille said. I knew what was coming. It's that I laughed. The words came out quietly. I laughed with her. My eyes burned. Marcus looked at me. I saw your face, Mom. I looked away. I knew the box, he continued. Maybe I didn't remember it immediately, but once you said Dad and I made it, I knew. And I still laughed because I was embarrassed. Marcus, no, I need to finish. I let him. I spent years being afraid people would think everything I had came from Dad. His voice cracked. Somewhere along the way, I started acting like where I came from was something to be ashamed of. That was the wound beneath everything. Not Hawthorne Ridge. Not Camille. Not even the trust. Marcus had confused honoring his father with living in his shadow. I reached across the table. You know what Samuel wanted for you? Marcus shook his head. He wanted you to build things he never could. Marcus looked surprised. He told me that, when not long before he died. I smiled through tears. He said you'd take the company places he couldn't imagine. Then why the trust? Because believing you could go farther didn't mean believing you could never go the wrong direction. Marcus stared at me. I squeezed his hand. I don't need you to become your father. His eyes filled. I need you to remember who you are. For a while neither of us spoke. Then Marcus asked the question I had been expecting. Not the question about the trust. Something harder. What happens with Camille? I can't answer that for you. She says she was trying to help me. Maybe she believes that. She hid things. Yes, but I let her. Yes. Marcus looked almost disappointed that I wouldn't blame everything on his wife. You're not going to tell me to leave her? No. Why? Because if you let your mother make that decision for you, you haven't learned anything." He laughed through his tears. Dad would say that. Your father would use more words. That made us both laugh. Marcus stood to leave an hour later. He picked up the walnut box. Then he paused. "I didn't come here to ask about the 35%, I know." "I don't want you to think my apology is because I need it. I don't." He nodded. At the door, he hugged me. Not the polite hug from his birthday, the kind he used to give me when he came home from college. After his truck disappeared, I returned to the kitchen. The trust documents were locked in my desk. For weeks, everyone had assumed the question was whether I would eventually give Marcus control of that 35%. But sitting alone at my kitchen table, I realized that wasn't the right question anymore. The company had never been built by one Brooks, and perhaps its future shouldn't belong entirely to one either. For the first time, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. 6 months after Marcus canceled Hawthorne Ridge, I walked into Brooks & Carter and almost didn't recognize the atmosphere. The building hadn't changed much. Same brick exterior, same reception desk, same framed photographs of completed projects along the hallway. But Marcus had. His office door was open. That was the first thing I noticed. Years earlier, Samuel had almost never closed his door, unless he was discussing something confidential. After Marcus took over, his office gradually became a place people entered by appointment. Now I watched an equipment supervisor walk straight in carrying a clipboard. Marcus looked up. "Give me 5 minutes, Mom. Take 10. I sat outside and listened to them discuss repairs on 2 company trucks. It wasn't glamorous. There were no investors, no million-dollar projections, just the ordinary machinery of a business staying alive. And Marcus was listening. That mattered. After Hawthorne Ridge collapsed, Marcus and Anthony spent nearly 2 months restructuring the company's growth strategy. They didn't stop expanding. Samuel would never have wanted fear to become an excuse for standing still. But they changed the way they evaluated risk. Large projects now required independent downside reviews. Major financing packages had to be read in full by every voting owner. And Marcus introduced a rule Anthony jokingly called Samuel's question. Before approving a project that could materially affect the company, they asked, if this fails, what will the people who work here lose? It didn't make every decision easy. It made every decision honest. Marcus eventually waved me into his office. "You're early. I'm 68. We arrive early because we don't enjoy rushing." He smiled. Then I noticed something on the shelf behind his desk. The walnut box, cleaned, not refinished. Marcus had left every scratch exactly where it was. Beside it stood the photograph of 12-year-old Marcus and Samuel. I pretended not to notice. Some things don't need to be discussed every time they matter. Marcus's marriage was another matter. He and Camille were still together, but together wasn't the same as everything is fine. For several weeks after the birthday dinner, Camille barely spoke to me. That was probably best for both of us. Marcus later told me they had begun marriage counseling. He also told me something I respected. He wasn't making Camille responsible for his ambition anymore. She had hidden the seriousness of the financing. That was her responsibility. But Marcus had ignored Anthony, failed to read the documents, and wanted Hawthorne Ridge badly enough to accept the version of the truth he preferred. That was his. Healing began when they stopped arguing over who deserved all the blame. I didn't know whether their marriage would survive. It wasn't my decision. What mattered was that Marcus had finally learned to set boundaries. Camille would never again participate in Brooks & Carter financing discussions simply because she had introduced an investor, and no major financial decision would be filtered through anyone before Marcus saw the complete documents himself. That afternoon, Anthony joined us. He carried a folder. This time I already knew what was inside. For weeks I had been working with an estate attorney on a change to the Brooks Family Trust's succession plan. Marcus looked between us. "Should I be nervous?" probably, Anthony said. I smiled. "Sit down." Marcus did. I placed the documents in front of him, the 35%. His expression became serious. "Mom, I told you I'm not asking for it. I know, and I'm not expecting it. I know that too." "Then what is this my decision?" He looked down at the documents. I explained carefully. I was not transferring the entire 35% to him. Not now, not later. Marcus didn't interrupt. Under the revised succession plan, a portion of the trust's shares would eventually pass to him. The remainder would be directed into an employee ownership trust structured for eligible long-term employees. Marcus stared at me. "Employees, yes." Anthony smiled. Marcus picked up the document. "How much enough to matter?" He read silently. I watched surprise move across his face. then thoughtfulness. I had prepared myself for resistance. Instead, Marcus asked why. "Because your father and I didn't build this alone." I pointed through the glass wall toward the offices outside. "Raymond gave this company 30 years. Marcus lowered his eyes. "Anthony gave it most of his career. People missed dinners, worked weekends, stayed through slow years, and helped protect the Brooks name when your father couldn't pay them what bigger companies could." Marcus nodded. "I remember. I want the people who helped create the value to share in some of what survives us." He leaned back. "What about control? The structure protects the company from being chopped into pieces. Your attorney can explain the details better than I can." Anthony coughed. I looked at him. "What nothing? You're laughing. I'm remembering someone telling you that you couldn't understand commercial financing." Marcus groaned. "Can we retire that story?" "No," Anthony and I said together. Marcus laughed. Then he looked at the papers again. After a long silence, he said Dad would have liked this. I shook my head. "No." Marcus looked up. "He would have liked that you understand why." His smile disappeared, not because he was hurt, because he understood. That was the difference. Later, Anthony left for a meeting, and Marcus walked me toward the lobby. We passed several employees along the way. He knew every name. Not because Samuel had known them, because Marcus did. At the front door, I turned back toward his office. From where I stood, I could just see the walnut box on the shelf. "You know," Marcus said, following my eyes, "Camille asked if I wanted to have it restored." I raised an eyebrow. "What did you say no?" "Good. I told her the scratches are part of it." I smiled. Samuel would have liked that too. Marcus opened the door for me. Outside, the afternoon sun warmed the brick building. For years, I had thought Samuel's final gift was hidden inside that walnut box. The brass key, the letter, the trust. 35% of a company worth millions. But standing there, I finally understood. None of those things had been the real gift. The real gift was the pause. Samuel had built one final safeguard into the company so that when our son became successful enough to believe he couldn't fail, someone could make him stop. Not forever. Just long enough to think, long enough to read, long enough to remember that leadership wasn't measured by how much risk you were brave enough to take. Sometimes it was measured by how many people you refused to drag into a risk they never chose. Marcus hugged me before I left. "I love you, Mom. I love you too." I walked toward my car. Halfway there, I looked back. Marcus was still standing in the doorway. For a moment, I could see Samuel in him. Not because Marcus had become his father. He hadn't. He never needed to. But my son finally understood the foundation beneath his feet, and for the first time in years, he was no longer ashamed of where it had begun. Sometimes the most valuable gifts arrive in the ugliest boxes. That night at Marcus's birthday dinner, Camille saw scratches, old wood, and something she thought belonged in a yard sale. Marcus saw it too, at least for a moment. Surrounded by expensive gifts and people he wanted to impress, my son forgot that the little walnut box represented something money could never replace where he came from. But this story was never really about humiliating Camille, and it wasn't about proving that I secretly controlled millions of dollars. It was about what we choose to do with power when we finally have it. Samuel could have given Marcus everything without conditions. Instead, he left a guardrail. At first, that might sound like distrust. I came to understand it as love. Parents sometimes believe loving their children means removing every obstacle, but some obstacles protect us. A locked door can make us search for the right key. A firm no can force us to ask a question we were avoiding. A boundary can save us from a decision made in pride. Marcus also taught me something important. Camille influenced him, but she didn't create every mistake he made. Marcus chose not to read. Marcus chose to ignore Anthony. Marcus chose to laugh when his wife mocked me. And healing only became possible when he stopped blaming everyone else and owned those choices. Forgiveness doesn't require pretending nothing happened. You can forgive someone and still keep boundaries. You can love your children without handing them everything you have. Money can be inherited. Property can be inherited. A company can be inherited. Character cannot. Character is chosen again and again, especially when nobody is forcing us to choose correctly. So I want to ask you something. If you had been in my place, would you have eventually given Marcus the entire 35% after his apology? Or would you have protected part of the company for the employees and the generation that came next? Tell me what you would have done in the comments. I genuinely want to know. And if stories about family betrayal, forgiveness, and finding the courage to protect what truly matters speak to you, subscribe and stay with me for the next one. Sometimes the thing everyone laughs at first is the very thing that reminds us what we should never have forgotten.